Hi everyone, welcome back to the next video series. So just to remind you, this is the topology which we are working on, and so what we are going to do in this video is so what we have done so far is we have downloaded the servers, we have configured the network, and we have tested the IP disconnect or tested the connectivity. So at this point, when we have completed this, which will be your coursework 1. So you should have connectivity between these two PCs, and you should have connectivity between these two PCs, which means here you could see my machines here. So if I go to the settings, I could see that I have two network adapters. One is VMnet 0 and VMnet 2. And if I go to my Debian server, and you should have VMnet 0 and VMnet 3, which means that um, this one is my VMnet 0, and obviously this is my VMnet 0, and this one is my VMnet 1, and this one is going to be my VMnet 3. So all these PCs must ping each other. So this PC should, these two servers should also ping. However, if you, from this PC, if you want to ping the other network, the outside network, which means if you want to ping outside the network, you could not be successfully pinging them, right? So the same way from here to here you can't ping, vice versa, here you can't ping as well. So this things won't work for you, and when we have completed this part, which would be our coursework 1. So this is the checklist, this is the requirements for you to start with your coursework 2, where you have all the networks up and running. So in our coursework 2, we have a lot of list of tasks which we want to do. However, planning is really very important. So if you want to plan, you have to understand what the concepts are, and then you have to work on it. So here, the first thing we were doing is in our SDC, which is our Windows Server network. This network, this is our Windows Server network, and this is our Debian server network or Linux server network, and this is the typically an interconnected network, which is the interconnected network which we are trying to simulate internet at this point of time. Even though it is a point-to-point connection, we try to simulate it as an internet. So at this point, even though the first task is for you to remote and route, activate the routing and remote access service, and then go on to site VPN, modify the firewall rules, and everything. Basically here what we have done is we have disabled the firewall. If you remember and recollect, so we went to, if you want to establish a ping, we went to the servers and the clients and disable the firewall here, because in Windows by default the firewalls are enabled and on, whereas in a Debian machine you might have not done that because those services might have not been installed. So that's a power of Linux. You want a service, you can install the service. They are not available by default for you, so it's very flexible for you to use any tools which you want or any utilities which you want to use in a Linux environment. So here the first thing I would recommend to do, or I would be doing, is creating a forest with your name. So in my case it is nitish.acca, and promote my SDC as a domain controller, which means my SDC would be a domain controller, right? So that's the first thing I would do, because once we have the domain controller in place, then it would be easy for us to get the control over the network. So that would be the first thing which we have to do, and which we have done it in our previous part of our previous series of videos, where we have configured or we have promoted this server as a domain controller, which means we have created a domain here in this case it is nitish.acc. That's a domain which we have created. So let's say that is a domain which we have created. So here nitish.acca, and then I have promoted this server as a domain controller, which means this is the boss. This is going to be the control over, or this is going to control the entire domain, or any users, any computers in our domain. So if you want to look into it, you go, once you have promoted as a domain controller, you could see that this is the server which is part of nitish.acca, and this would have pretty much a lot of controls over here. So you could see if we go to the users and computers, you have different organizational units here, because that is how that's the advantage of Windows Server, where you have categorized them into different organizational units, right? So computers are one organizational unit. So you can see that client one is already added part of it, and SDC is the domain controller. You have promoted it, so you should see SDC here. And another organizational unit is the users. So you can create users, which we have done. We have created Nitish or Murugan as a domain as a user, and then Muniradzi as a user as well. Um, so the thing here is, also I think in one of my videos I have differentiated you about the rights which each domain user has. So you create a user, you have to add them as a member. By default, they will be domain users. You can make them as an administrator. Even as an administrator, they don't have admin rights, admin privileges on the domain. So if you want them to be an administrator over the domain, then you have to add them as part of a domain admins group, right? So we did discuss that, and we have promoted them as well. And then what we have did is we have joined the client S1 to your domain, which means this would be part of my domain as well, which means this will enable the domain controller, the SDC, to control the member within the domain. So the client can be controlled. That's what here you could see that you have I closed it, sorry. So when you go to the users and computers, you could see that client one S1 is part of the domain. So you want to enforce policies, you want to enforce rules, you want to control the users who are logging in and do what they are doing. If you want to establish any controls, you can do that. So one of the ways you can do the controls is by adding group policies objects. So here you could see that there is a group policy management, that's for the domain, and you go into the domain, and within this domain you have the group policy objects which you can work around. So you have different group policy objects which you can set on. So that is something which you can look into it, and you can work around the group policy objects as well, right? So that's how you establish connectivity. So that's something which we have completed as well. And then now let's go and work on these two things. One is routing and remote access services. So typically what this routing and remote access services is going to do here is, I have my server. Let's go back here. I have my server, and as I said earlier, my server will there is no routing services enabled, which means this network, the packets from 192.168.1.0 can't go and talk to 10.0 network or 192.168.2.0 network, because routing is not enabled. Routing is a layer 3 service for which you need a layer 3 device. Usually if you are a networks and cybersecurity student, you might have studied something in advanced networking, where you do routers, you configure routers, and you configure switches. Switches are layer 2, so routers are layer 3. So in case of a switch, you can create a switch here. If you are going to have more than one client associated, which is the real-time environment, you can connect everyone, all the devices to a switch, so that they can um, communicate within the network. However, if you want to go and communicate outside the network, which means you want to make this server consider itself or do the task of a router. Okay, so I'm just representing router as a circle here. um, so which means the domain controller will act as a router as well, and then it will forward the packets outside. Okay, which means we are establishing interconnected networks here. So that's what routing services are. It also does another service which is that is routing. So whatever I said now is routing, and the other one is remote access services. So what is this remote access services? It is going to help in accessing remotely remote access service, like you do LAN routing, um, you do kind of VPNs, and all those things is possible with remote access services. Okay, so only when we do this here in our server, then we can allow the packets to talk to a different network. So this would be our next thing which we will be doing here, and then it will enable us to create a site-to-site VPN. Coming back to the Linux part of the network, here it says that install routing and remote access service. Actually, this service is part of a Windows server. Okay, so you go in here and you could see that there is a remote access, remote and routing and remote access. So you click that, you can see this. This is the RRAS service, routing and remote access service, which is part of Microsoft Windows server. So can we do Microsoft services in a Linux machine? No, you can't do that. So why do the task ask you to install routing and remote access service? In order to critically understand, critically analyze the situation here, and understand the difference between a Windows server, the power of a Windows server, and the power of a Linux server as well. So Linux can't work with a service which is offered by Windows. However, they have equivalent services that can help in routing and remote access, which means we are going for, you have to justify in your coursework why you can't install routing and remote access service, and what are the equivalent routing and remote access services which you can use. Again, that here you have different methods to work on, different tools you can use on. So I would be using one tool here for your demonstration, or maybe a couple of things for you to show an example of how this can be possible. However, you are not entitled, or you don't want to necessarily follow what I am doing. If you have a better method, better tool to use, if you're comfortable with a different tool, you are free to use that tool. The point here is to understand the difference between a Windows service and a Linux service, and how the different services could be configured and worked on. So this we will be doing, and then we will try to modify the firewalls here, and then we will skip this creating a child domain. I will talk about that when we are working on the child domain here in the Linux missions. So the next one, because here we are going to create a VPN, configure site-to-site VPN here. We will also do configure site-to-site VPN to the Swansea network and set it to a persistent connection. A persistent connection is connected permanently, whereas if you are not having this persistent connection, it would be a connection which is not persistent. So every time you reboot, you might lose the connectivity. Okay, or on a particular time, if there is no there's no network traffic going around, the connection could be lost. Okay, you might experience this when you are working on both Windows and Linux as well. So sometimes you configure it and you test it, it works, you reboot it, it won't work. So it is because you haven't set the connection as a persistent connection. So these are the two areas which we would be focusing at this point. So what would happen at the end if we have configured routing and remote access, configured site-to-site VPNs? So what would happen is this would be the output. So you go from a Windows client or Windows server, and you ping the network, which is the Debian network, the Linux network. You'll be successfully able to ping. So 192.168.2.1 here for me is the Debian client, and 2.10 is my Debian server. So I can ping from here. If I go to my Windows client, even though I haven't set up any site-to-site VPNs here, so if I go to my command prompt config, so you could see that I only have one adapter, ping 192.168.1.1, which is my server, that is a ping. And if I want to ping 2.1, which is my Debian client, it can ping. If I'm going to ping 2.10, which is my server, it can ping. The same way from the Debian, you could see that already there is a ping which is going on. So you can ping client here, you can ping server, the Windows server as well. Same way from the Debian client, if you want to ping as well, you can ping. So, so if you want to ping the server, you should be able to ping. Okay, so it is not pinging from here. It is due to an issue which I'll leave it for you to troubleshoot. So actually what should happen here is you should be able to successfully ping from the Debian client as well. So that means totally you have the connectivity between all the networking devices within our simulated enterprise network. So it could be like even though this is a different network, this is a different network, this is a different network, we are working with three different networks. Any connectivity between the networks should be successful. So the same way from here and the same way from here, it should be successful. So at this point, you should be able to successfully ping. Right. Why my Debian client can't ping my Debian network? That's something which I leave it to you to troubleshoot. So if I ping the Debian client, maybe this is the problem. I'm now trying to ping the Debian server. It is not pinging. So there is, it says that destination host is unreachable. As you could see that the Debian server is already here, right? So this is something which I would leave you to think and troubleshoot. Okay, so here from here I can ping the client, but from the client I can't ping the server as well. That's a problem maybe which you have to look around and work on it. So this would be the output of for us after we have configured uh, these two things. One is routing and remote access service, and then we are installing equivalent services here, and then to configure a site-to-site VPN as well. So this is what we will be doing in this continuous videos. We will be configuring routing and remote access service, and we will be configuring it in both the Linux machines, Linux network, and the Windows network.